Hi, I'm Sarah Janice Brown. Welcome to the Fun School Show, where me and my family are going to help you create your homeschool lifestyle. Today, I'm going to be talking about how I got started in homeschooling, and it's not what you think. It didn't start when my child was entering kindergarten. It started when I was a struggling third grader who had just failed, and I began to reimagine what school could be like. So how did I get started with homeschooling? Well, it didn't start when my oldest child was 5 years old. Started, about 20 years before that happened. So when I was a little girl, I really struggled in school. I was one of those kids that was really awkward and shy and scared and hated school, and there were bullies and there were fluorescent lights and there were no windows in my classroom, and I didn't like people telling me what to do, especially teachers. I was a little kid that was full of imagination and always turning my worksheets into art projects. I would turn everything into an art project when I was a kid, and I was constantly getting in trouble for that. And when I was in third grade, my teacher was saying to me that I need to learn how to read. And I said, I don't need to learn how to read because when I grow up, I'm going to be an artist like my mom. I don't have to read. And I failed third grade because I just wasn't reading. All symbolic learning was just really difficult. Working with letters, working with numbers, trying to read, trying to write. But I knew I was good at art and I was passionate about that. And I actually didn't really care that I wasn't so good at reading and writing because at the time I didn't feel like it was very important to my life. As time went on, I was struggling more and more and more in school. I was getting C's and D's all the time, and I began to just be ashamed of that and began to think that I'm just not smart. But I knew I was good at art. And that was kind of a comfort to me as a kid that I was really good. And that just made me really just have something I could be proud of myself for. And so failed third grade. It was so embarrassing. It just really was. And I began to reimagine at that point what school should be if I was in charge. So as a kid, I was just daydreaming all the time and just thinking if I was in charge, there would be animals in the school. If I was in charge, we would take field trips every day instead of learning through books. And if I was in charge, school would be definitely at the zoo or at an art museum. And I was just so bored in a classroom environment. And other kids really liked to pick on me. And so it was always miserable going to school. So then something happened. My younger sister got sick and couldn't go to school. So my parents discovered something called homeschooling. And I began to notice that when I was walking to the bus stop, my little sister was gathering her workbooks and she was sitting at the dining room table and she was doing school at home. And the funny thing was, is she would finish up her schoolwork early in the day and she would have the rest of the day free. She didn't even have homework. I'm like, I want to do that. I was in 7th grade, had just been transferred to a new school because our family had moved, and it wasn't going well. And in this middle school, there were kids doing drugs. They were giving each other tattoos in the bathroom, and people were just being really, really aggressive and inappropriate, and I felt so uncomfortable, and I began to just beg my parents to let me homeschool too. But that wasn't really the plan. They were like, no, you're healthy. You need to go to school. Homeschooling just wasn't something that people did. And then my mom started getting a magazine. I think it was called Homeschooling Today. And I found this magazine in our house, and I began to flip through it. And on the cover was like a family with like 8 kids, all in matching clothing, and with like all the girls were in long dresses. And I'm like, what is this? And I began to read and flip through the articles in this Homeschooling Today magazine. And what I learned was that anyone can homeschool, and people actually choose to homeschool. And it's a great way for kids to learn. And so I began to build a case to be homeschooled. And my parents didn't have a lot of money. They were really struggling. My mom was an artist. My dad was a pastor who had gotten laid off from NASA when the Challenger blew up, and we had moved out of state. And so it was a big sacrifice for my parents to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on my sister's curriculum. So when I was asking them, please let me homeschool too, look, this magazine says anyone can homeschool. They're like, well, maybe next year, because it would cost hundreds of dollars to buy you the curriculum. And here's the thing, and this is the idea that changed the course of my life. I said to my dad and to my mom, doesn't the public library have enough books for me to get an education? And my dad was like, that's a really good point. And so here's what happened. They let me homeschool starting after Christmas vacation. I was 13 years old, and it was my first day of homeschooling. My parents were really busy with my sister and whatever they had going on that day, and so they took me seriously with my idea about going to the public library to get my school books. And the library was only a few blocks away, so here's what it looked like for me. My mom and dad bought me 6 or 7 composition journals. Those are those little notebooks with the black and white speckles, and my mom wrote on the cover of every notebook a different subject, one for science, social studies, math, history, language arts. And she sent me to the library and said, ask the librarian to help you find a book on each subject at your grade level. I'm like, okay. Sounds easy. So I went to the library and I found the librarian and I said, hi, I'm doing school at home and I need to pick out school books for 7th grade. And this is another life-changing moment for me. You know, you sometimes have these moments where something is done, something is said, an idea is shared, and it changes the course of your life. And this is what the librarian said to me. She's like, sure, I can help, but what are you interested in? And I'm like, what am I interested in? When did that ever matter when you think about school? No one ever asks you what you're interested in. You're just told what you have to learn. And I said, well, I have to study science and social studies and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, yeah, but these subjects are so vast that you could be studying so many different things and they qualify as science, social studies, and history. And she said, I have an idea. Let me show you the oversized book section. And so the librarian took me to a section of the library that I didn't even know existed. And she said, this is the oversized book section. In this section, there's a little bit of everything, and these books are great. They have a lot of illustrations. They're just beautiful books. So why don't you take some time and look through all these books in the oversized book section, and then tell me what you're interested in. I remember that day sitting on the floor in the library, and I had pulled so many books off the shelf, and I'm just flipping through them. These have large illustrations, they have graphs, they have charts, and I stopped thinking about 7th grade science, 7th grade social studies, 7th grade language arts, and my mind opened to realize that there is so much that I could be learning that was actually interesting. Textbooks are not interesting. Workbooks are not interesting. But these books, they were beautiful. I mean, the photography in these books. And so my imagination began to run wild. You know, I'd always been told to stop using my imagination, stop daydreaming. But as I flipped through those books, I realized that I had the opportunity to study the things that I love. What do I love? And so it was like time stood still as I just began flipping through these books. And It's such a vivid memory that I can go right back to that place in my imagination and remember. And so the librarian came to check on me, and I had a stack of like 13 books. I can remember it as if it were this morning, and I'll tell you, she's like, "So did you discover anything you were interested in?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to learn about ancient Egypt. I want to learn Greek, Hebrew, hieroglyphics, and alternative alphabets. I want to study the history of fashion. I want to understand how the brain grows. I want to learn about nutrition and what kind of vitamins and minerals are in my food. And I want to learn about architecture. I want to learn about the Oregon Trail. I want to learn about the pioneers. And I want to learn about how to build a cabin and live like a pioneer." And I said, "So what subjects do all those things qualify as?" And she said, "Well, if you think about it, every one of those topics cover every subject." And that was another big moment for me. When you're studying a topic that you love, history, science, social studies, language arts, math, literature, it's all combined in the context of the topic that you're excited about. There are really only two reasons why a person would learn something. Actually, three. Number one, you learn something because you need to know. Number two, you learn something because you would love to know. And number three, you learn something because you are being forced and shamed and controlled into learning it. Number three is the method that is almost always used in schools and in traditional education. Children are told, you have to learn this because someday you're going to need to build your life on this foundation of common knowledge. As children, we are so curious. Think about the 4-year-old, the 5-year-old before they start school. They ask like 1,000 questions a day. No one's forcing them to learn. They're passionate about the world. They want to know about the world. And then you put them in school and it's like the lights go out. They stop asking questions and they just start behaving or misbehaving. The curious kids, the ones that are full of energy and wonder, who had been asking like 1,000 questions a day, now they're trying their best to sit still on the desk at school, don't wiggle, pay attention, don't get into trouble. What a beautiful thing it would be if children never lost the wonder, if they never stopped asking questions. And so as I was sitting in that library, surrounded by just all those books spread out all around me, that childlike wonder and curiosity returned to me, because suddenly I had something that all people of all time crave and long for and desire: freedom. I was given the freedom to learn and to study and to explore the things that I wanted to learn about, the things that mattered to me. And I began to think, what do I want to become? When I was a little girl, I wanted to be an artist and an astronaut. And you wouldn't believe how people told me I can't be an artist because artists don't make money, and I can't be an astronaut because hardly anybody gets to be an astronaut, and I wasn't doing well enough in school to become an astronaut. And so the two things I was so passionate about as a little girl, people discouraged me so much. Not my parents. My dad worked for NASA, and he was always taking me to the launches, and he would take me to see the space shuttle, and he would take me with him to family days. I didn't want to miss a launch. And as a little girl, I imagined that I could be an astronaut. And if I couldn't be an astronaut, I wanted to be a space camp director. And I also wanted to be an artist, and my mom was an artist. What did I want as a little girl? I wanted to be like my mom and dad. I wanted to work in space like my dad, and my mom was an artist, painted beautiful paintings, and I was so inspired by what my parents were doing, and I was so bored at school. But that day in the library, when the librarian said, "What are you interested in?" honestly, when she asked me that question, I just felt like this burden of sadness that I don't know. No one's asked me. They've been suppressing my curiosity and my wonder for the past 7 years in school, telling me that I have to study this and I have to study that and I have to pass this test and it's only grades that matter. And then to be asked, what are you interested in? It was beautiful. It was beautiful to have someone in my life at that moment take me seriously as a 13-year-old girl who might have an interest, who might have a dream. In school, before I began homeschooling, they were always just saying, don't focus on art. You're good enough at art. You need to focus on spelling. Oh, no, don't focus on space. You know enough about space. You need to learn about geography. But what are we going to become? What are we going to do with our lives? Do we really need our kids to be making the main focus of their education their weaknesses? So as my parents began to homeschool me, here's what it looked like. I had a giant stack of library books about all these wonderful, amazing things I was really excited about. And then I had my stack of composition journals and lots of white paper and some notebooks full of white paper, and I had some sketchbooks. And this is what school looked like for me. I would wake up in the morning so excited to learn. And I would just sit at the dining room table, or I would sit on my bedroom floor, and I would just open up all these books, and I would take my journals, and I would take my sketchbooks, and I would just simply copy everything interesting that I was reading about into my composition journals. And if I ever saw like beautiful photography or artwork that inspired me, I would copy it. I made a little book about the history of clothing, starting with Adam and Eve and the fig leaves, going all the way through like the Victorian times with their just incredibly complex clothing, to what I imagined clothing would look like in the future. And it was so much fun. I had so much fun being in control of my education. I had never heard of the term unschooling or child-directed learning. What my mom did realize is that there was a way to do school that was not subject by subject. In those magazines, she learned about a thing called unit studies, and she learned about another way of schooling called project-based homeschooling. And so my parents saw that I was thriving with the library-based homeschooling and with doing projects, that they began to organize my homeschooling around projects and around self-directed learning about the things I was passionate about. I loved learning. And so as we got a few months into homeschooling, I began to not just want to learn about things, I wanted to do things, and I began to develop dreams. And so I said to my dad, I want to build a cabin in the woods that would be like the old world, like the 1800s. And I want to go out into the woods behind my house. We had an acre of woods, and I want to live like a pioneer. And I want to build fires and cook food over the fires, because I wanted to experience what life was like for people on the Oregon Trail and in the pioneer days. Also, I asked for clay because I wanted to actually make a replica of everything that was inside of King Tut's burial pyramid, I guess, and I wanted to make a replica of his mummy case. And so I had gotten some clay, and I was just making a sculpture of everything that was buried with King Tut in ancient Egypt. My dad said that the best way to learn math and geometry is to build. So he was so excited. He said, we can do this, but we don't have the money. So you're going to need to earn the money. And so you're going to need to start a business. And he's like, you're creative and you want to be an artist. You should start a business. And my parents had noticed how I was making all these like Egyptian artifacts out of clay. And my dad's like, well, you could make stuff out of clay and sell it. I'm like, nobody would want to buy a mummy case. And he's like, yeah, but you could make jewelry. And so he took me to the art store, and he said he was going to invest $100 in my first business. And I bought a bunch of clay and a bunch of jewelry making supplies. And my dad ordered a receipt book for me that said Sarah's Creations. And then he began to help me research art and craft shows that were going to be in the area, helped me start my first business called Sarah's Creations. And I began to make jewelry out of clay. People weren't that interested in buying my Egyptian mummy necklaces, but they were interested in buying my fish jewelry, my dog jewelry, my cat jewelry, and it was a lot of fun. And so that first summer when I was 14 years old, I made $1,400 back in 1991. That was a really big deal for a kid. And I felt so empowered. And I saved every bit of money that I didn't reinvest into my little business to build my cottage in the woods. And so that, I guess it was later that fall or maybe the next spring, my dad took me to the hardware store with my $1,000-something, and we began to just get all the supplies. We had sat down, we had built a model of the cabin, we had worked out all of the measurements, we had done all the math and all the work to figure out what all the building materials would need to be. And then he took me to the store, and I paid for all the building materials to build a cottage in the woods behind my house. And it was amazing. It was just incredible. And what began with a child who had really struggled in the conventional classroom, really just dreaming of what school should look like, I began to just create a dream. And then, when my sister got sick, I had just that dream awaken that maybe I can homeschool too. You just never know what these little moments in your life are going to create that's going to impact you for a lifetime. As a child, I was just so excited to learn. And I had never been excited to learn and to research and study when I was in school. But when that librarian said, "What are you interested in?" When she introduced me to the oversized books section in the library, when my dad said, "Sure, you can build a cottage, but first you need to start a business," when my parents invested that first $100 in my first business, these are the things that help you to launch a child. I could have been an ordinary, confused, depressed 13-year-old in middle school, but my parents gave me something amazing. They gave me freedom. And my mom and dad didn't think they were qualified to homeschool because they weren't teachers. But that's not true. And maybe you're a parent and you're considering maybe homeschooling your child and you feel like maybe you're not qualified because you're not a teacher. This is the interesting thing. I didn't want to grow up to be a teacher. I wanted to grow up to be an artist and a mother like my mom. I wanted to grow up and be involved in space and flight and space exploration like my dad. And so why would I need a teacher who's just going to use textbooks and workbooks? My dad had an incredible library that I didn't pay much attention to as a child. Now, when I was a little girl and I was doing third grade for the second time, and I finally learned to read, I was so excited because I could read the encyclopedias. And so as a little girl, I would come home and I would just open up the encyclopedias and I would just begin to sketch and I would draw from the encyclopedias and I would carry encyclopedias around with me. They were amazing. And I had already begun kind of homeschooling, unschooling myself in the after-school hours. And it was exciting to me, but I was so bored by school. And yet, homeschooling gave me an opportunity to have that freedom to explore the things that I love. Now, you may be saying, well, my child has no idea what they want to do, what they want to learn, what they want to become. And so where do you go from that point? I was that child. I was that child who got to the point in school where I was totally burnt out and I was actually kind of depressed as a kid. I was being bullied in school and I dreaded going, and I had lost my joy in life. But then that opportunity, when that librarian asked me what I wanted to learn, when I opened up those magazines and read that anyone can homeschool, my parents did have what it took to help me become who I was meant to be. And here's the thing. Who put me into that family? God did, knowing that this was a child who had a huge imagination, a passion for art, a passion for space, just a passion for rethinking how we do the world. As a little girl, I always imagined how the world could be different and how artists and astronauts could change the world. And no, I never became an astronaut, but I did become an artist, and I did become a curriculum developer, and I did develop a therapy that helped kids overcome dyslexia, and I did create a fun schooling learning center on a 22-acre farm, and I did create an alternative school and learning center for 50 families during COVID, and I did go to orphanages and set up learning spaces and therapeutic learning areas. I did so many things that were all built on the foundation of that one librarian saying, "What are you interested in?" And then my dad saying, "Yes, you can start a business. Yes, you can build a cottage in the woods. Yes, you can pretend like it's 1890. And so that's what I want to encourage you to do right now. I want you to think about what is possible. What is possible when you equip your child to become who they want to be? Now, things were a little different when I was a child. We didn't have the distraction of phones, iPads, internet, gaming. I had a Nintendo. It played Mario and Tetris and Duck Hunt, and that was it. And my parents didn't let us just play all day. You know, I really want your child to be successful. I really want them to become everything that they were designed to be. I want them to be full of life, imagination, curiosity. I want them to love research and exploration and art as much as I did when I was 13. But you know what's going to get in the way of that? Addiction. Addiction to media, addiction to entertainment, addiction to the constant interruption of the devices that surround us. So I want to encourage you, when you take that step and you want to empower your child to begin falling in love with learning and research and exploration, you might need to unplug a little bit. Yes, the internet has amazing resources. We can learn so many things on YouTube, and that's a whole nother conversation. Because when I grew up, I decided I was going to homeschool my kids with delight-directed unit studies mixed with unschooling, mixed with a little Charlotte Mason, very wild and free, focused on what my kids wanted to be when they grow up. And so I developed a homeschooling method called fun schooling that was based on the way I had begun learning when I was a child, when I took that big stack of library books and began to study what I love. And so I took the seeds of that idea as a child, and I developed a whole method of homeschooling around that type of learning, and my children have thrived, and they have just loved learning. My kids are passionate learners, and I organize their education around what they love and what they want to be when they grow up. And there's no fight. There's no argument. My kids love learning, and I love learning right beside them. So how did I get involved with homeschooling? Started with a dream of a little girl who had failed third grade, who reimagined what education could be. And I want you to take some time now to reimagine, what can education be? It's going to look different for every family. It's going to look different for every child. But what I want you to know is that you can embrace freedom. And education can be this beautiful adventure in learning. And if you need tools, there are so many tools now to get started, but don't underestimate the power of going to the library, finding the oversized book section, and saying to your child, take a look at these books and think, what are you interested in? So you want to get started with homeschooling? Here's a book I created just for moms called Flip to Fun Schooling. Maybe you're homeschooling, but your lifestyle just is super boring, or your kids argue all the time, or maybe you can't find time to do the things that you love and what your kids love. Well, this book, Flip to Fun Schooling, is going to walk you through the process of creating a homeschooling lifestyle that is about fun, curiosity, exploring, learning, and helping your child to become who they were created to be. Link in the description.